Have you ever finished a book, you love it, and then months later, you don't remember anything about what happened and sometimes even the character names, which is especially frustrating if there is a sequel or another book coming out in the series, and now you feel like you have to reread the previous book so that you know what happened so you're prepared going into the next one. That's definitely happened to me, and today I'm going to be sharing some tips on how you can remember what you read, which will be especially helpful whether you read a lot of series, you just want to remember things that happen in the books that you read, or sometimes if you're reading a lot of the same kind of books, that way you keep them all separate and you remember details. And don't worry, some of these are actually going to be digital and some are going to be analog. So no matter what kind of reader you are or your personal preference for storing information, then I've got some recommendations for you. It can be so frustrating when you pick up a book and you're just left wondering, who are these people? Was there a cliffhanger in the previous book? Why are these people fighting? So instead of rereading the previous book or Googling for spoilers, let's build a system that actually works for you to refresh your memory when you need it most. We're going to start off with easy things, and the first thing I'm going to recommend is that you develop a system that works for you for annotating what you're reading. Now, you don't have to get super creative and super in-depth, but there are some things that you might want to tab and remember or highlight if you're using a Kindle, like maybe first appearances of a character, major twists, key moments, some foreshadowing clues, and of course the ending. If you're doing this on a physical copy of a book, you simply can use tabs and color code those tabs so that each one means something, so that you're able to go back to that moment and pick up on those clues. I do have a whole post on the blog on how you can start as a beginner annotating books, so if that's something that you're into and you want to start doing, you can certainly do that. I know that some people also go farther than just the tabs. They may also use highlighters, so definitely do as much or as little as you want. If you want to write yourself notes in those books as well, and you don't want to write on the pages of your books, because for me that's a little bit scary, you can definitely also use post-it notes. There's clear post-it notes if you want to add those in, or just add some color to it and just stick those in those pages that you've already tabbed with your notes referring to that moment. So when it's time for you to pick up the next book, all you have to do is kind of browse through those annotations and those notes that you left for yourself, and you will have a pretty good idea what that book was about without having to read the whole thing. Again, if you read on your Kindle, you can highlight the quotes or the moments, and you can also leave yourself notes. In case you didn't know, you can actually write notes within a Kindle ebook. Obviously, if you're using something like Kindle Unlimited, the moment that you return that book, then you're going to lose those notes. So you're going to want to have a way to save that information, and we'll get to that in a second. I would probably suggest a digital tool for that we're going to talk about towards the end of this video, but you could also just handwrite some of those notes in a notebook for later on. So even if you're using Kindle Unlimited, do the process as you're reading the ebook and then transfer that information later on before returning the Kindle book. Now that also means this is something that you have to be doing as you're reading the book. It's very difficult to come back to the book and annotate without actually reading the whole thing again. So you have to have your page flags, you have to have your post-it notes, a pen, a highlighter, whatever tools you decide to use. You should have them with you when you're reading the book so that you're going with the flow without having to go back to it. But like I said, this is probably one of the easy methods. Kind of do it as you go and forget it. And I will leave my beginner's guide to annotating books on the blog linked down below. But the rest of the tips that I have here are more things that you do after you finish the book. You can do some of it as you're reading, but I would recommend doing it at the end of the book, kind of like going through a personal review, if you will. But you're not just reviewing the book, you're giving your future self context for what the book was about. To do this, you can use paper or you can use digital. So with paper, you just need to get a notebook. Plain notebook, cheap notebook, doesn't matter. Just a plain notebook where you can jot down your notes about what happened in the book. Now remember, you're not writing a review in this case. You're actually telling yourself what happened in the book. So you have to be specific with events, with things that happen, maybe your feelings on certain characters, predictions, all the foreshadowing that you picked up on. You got to be very specific on those things. So I've got some questions that you can answer while you're doing that exercise at the end of the book. Who are the main characters and what do they want? What was the central conflict or question of the story? What major plot points or twists happened? How did the book end? Were there any cliffhangers or setups for the next book? Do you have any favorite moments or quotes from the book? And then what are your overall thoughts and vibes of the book. Answering these questions will give you a pretty good vibe of what the book was about so that you can just read this through again in the future when you're picking up, say, the second book, or you want a refresher of what this book was about. And it will give you enough context and refresh your memory without having to reread the whole thing. Now, like I said, you can do this digitally or you can do this on paper. So paper is obviously simple. You don't have to make it super decorative, although if you want, you can. But if you want to go digital, you have several options. So I'm going to discuss 4 of them here today. The first one is just to move that journal that you're using on paper to a digital platform. And for this, you're just going to use a digital notebook on an app like GoodNotes, Notability, Noteful, or any of the note-taking apps. What is a digital notebook? It's basically a PDF. Usually it has a cover, sometimes they're tabbed, and inside there you just have plain paper. Digital paper, that is. You'll choose the format that works best for you, whether it's aligned, a dotted, a squared, blank pages, and in there you can do whatever you want. But my biggest recommendation is don't worry about how it looks, because remember that you're doing this more for the functionality of remembering the books you read. So if it's easier and less pressure for you to just write and not worry about decorating, then just do that. If you're doing digital, it's very easy to also just bring in a cover for the book, so that way it adds that little bit of touch. And if you don't like your handwriting, you can use text tools inside of that digital notebook so that the actual text looks nice and neat on the page. If you're interested to try out a digital notebook, I do have one that I created as well, and I will leave that link down below for you to check it out if you want. You can also get digital reading journals for this purpose, but I find that just a regular digital notebook where you can just write at your heart's content would work better, because sometimes you might end up writing 4 pages about the same book because you have a lot to say, and sometimes it's going to be very little. But remember, this is your notebook for remembering things. It's not about aesthetics. So that is the biggest takeaway that I can tell you, because it's very easy to go down the rabbit hole of wanting all of these things to look really pretty, and the pressure of having to make it pretty keeps you from actually sitting down and writing things down. Now, I will also recommend the kits from Indiga Healer. So these are not reading journals per se, they're more like just plain notebooks, but they're realistic digital notebooks. And she does have some kits that come prepared for you to use every single month. If you get a subscription, you get different designs every month. You can buy a la carte as well. And you're basically going to have something that if you do like a little bit more aesthetic, you can have that, but then you can just plop in there a plain notebook page and just write without worrying too much about decorations, or with very minimal decoration, you can get those pages done. So that is one that I would recommend as a compromise if you are looking for aesthetics, but you don't want it to take a long time as well. Her kits will come with backgrounds, with different kind of notebooks, with different overlays, with lots of stickers that you can also use. So I definitely recommend that for you to check out. And in fact, I have a plan with me kind of video where I did my reading journal for May using one of her kits. So if you're interested in that, I will leave it linked down below so you can see how I did that. If you want to take this a step further, I would suggest using an app like Notion to track your reading. I have created a Notion reading journal, actually 2 templates of Notion reading journals that you can look through and see if they would be helpful for you to save all of this information on the books that you're reading. The reason why you wouldn't want to use an app like, for example, Goodreads to track these kind of things is because you are going to be putting a lot of spoilers about the book in there, and it's just easier to keep that off of those platforms. And if you want to post a formal review for the book, that's different, and you can keep that there. Now, where you're using an app like Notion, you're going to have a template that guides you through saving information into it, and you're going to be able to create pages for each of the books you read. Now, for example, in this template that I created, I do have some reading notes that are categorized that also can help you save some information. I have some categories for character description, which you can just add information there, general thoughts about the book, quotes that you want to save, your actual review, any vocabulary or things like that in case there is maybe some more world building or words that you added. And you can always add more to this reading notes list for things that you want to track. So for example, if you wanted to track plot twists, or you wanted to track main plot of the book or things like that, you can always add more of these to these reading notes, and you can actually have them categorized, and then you just save things in the order that they need to be. Otherwise, if it's easier for you to just do a brain dump of information, you can just type it into this page. And again, this is always going to be something that is easy for you to access. You can just read through it and refresh. Now, along the same veins of using Notion or a digital reading tracker, you can also use an app that I recently discovered this year, which I actually find it super easy to use, and it's called Capacities. So the way Capacities work is that everything you save into it is an object. So you can set up the types of objects that you use, however is best for you. For example, you can create a books type of object, which I have done here. And within the object, you can also create collections, which in my case, I use genres for the collections. Now, once you open your book object that you have saved, you can add some information about the book. If you look on the right, what you have is everything that you have saved for this book. So in my daily notes, I was actually keeping track of how far along I was in that book. So in my case, for example, in this book, I can see I started reading it March 12th, and I actually kept a little note here that it opened up with the spring equinox. And if I want to see more, if there's more to this note, I can just simply click on it and it will jump to that particular note. I made another update note on March 13th, so it's the day after, where I got to 70%. I added a fire emoji, but I did put a note that I still think that the sister's book was better. And then I do have my note on March 14th that I finished 100%. Now, in the process of reading, I also saved 2 quotes or screenshots from my Kindle, and I can see those right here. So as you can see, it doesn't have as much structure as a Notion database, but it is very, very easy to use and very easy to save. And you can also do this very fast on your phone by downloading the app. Any screenshot that's uploaded here is another type of object, because those are separate things that were embedded in. So I have an image type of object, and then I link those images to this book object. And if you open up the graph view in Capacities, it actually shows you all of that right here on the right hand side. It has the daily notes, it has the things that I was doing that day as well. So any objects that are linked or related to when I was reading that book are going to show up there, and I can simply click on them, which I think is a really neat feature to have. But another thing that comes built in is the daily notes. So Capacities does come with basically a calendar view, and you can just write notes in here. If you wanted to tag the book, you simply go into a new line and you will actually add and start typing. In this case was Enchantra. And if I start typing, I can see that the book Enchantra pops up. And if I click that, now this daily note will show up. So that's a very easy way for you to add notes to that book without having to edit anything in a database or go into a lot of different functions, which I think for me, it's a way that works a little bit faster than Notion. And there's many things where this is more useful. And then the last thing I want to mention in regards to Capacities is that you also have tags. Now we've talked about the object, which is the book type object, and you can put those objects in collections. Like for example, for books, I use the genres. However, you can tag any object in Capacities with tags, and you can create new tags on the go. So if you're adding a quote and you want to add that quote, like to say it's a romantic quote, or it's a quote that has to do with the world building or a plot point or a character description, all of those things can become tags that you create. And even if you don't have the tag already in the system, as you're saving that image with the screenshot, for example, you can add and create that tag, and then you'll be able to reference those really easy. So in Capacities, the tags are also basically an object. So when you go and look at your tags, you have your list of all of the tags that you have created. And then when you're adding, whether it's a book, a screenshot, an image, whatever you're adding, you have this tags function right here, and you can add tags to it. So either you'll select from ones that are already created in the system, or you'll simply start typing and click create tag, and that's going to create that. So that's going to be a great way for you to reference information. So like I said, you can have tags for character descriptions, you can have tag for swoony romantic quotes, and many, many more things. So a lot of the tabs that you would do for annotations, you can actually recreate that system inside of Capacities really easy. So when I was talking about moving your notes from a Kindle ebook, because you have to return it to Kindle Unlimited, it becomes actually really easy for you to screenshot those and move them into Capacities with a tag system. Keep your notes in there as well. Like for example, if you were to upload an image or just add a note at a specific point of the book, you can simply add that here. And I have a tag specifically for reading, so that way all of my reading notes are going in the reading tag. So I start my note on the daily page with the tag reading, then I tag the book object, then I say about what percentage I'm at, and then if I do have a note, I'll just write it in, and as you can see, that will show up here. But I think overall the tagging system is one of the most useful things that you can use in Capacities. And even if that's all you do is you use the tags, you don't even have to create collections, because the genres, for example, could be a tag as well. So you can keep it very simple, and it's just a way for you to easily and quickly add information into your system as you're reading, because like I said, it's also very easy and fast to use from your phone. Now here comes my favorite tip. Instead of writing all of this down, you can actually just record yourself. I think voice notes are an underrated, underused option for saving information of what you thought about a book, and it's a more natural way of grabbing all of that information without having to sit down and overanalyze anything while you're writing it. So you can do this in two ways. The first one is the obvious one. Just use the voice notes app that you have on your phone. Just make sure that you're labeling those very well with the book title. If you generally read a book multiple times, then also add a specific date. And if you read a lot and you're going to have a lot of these notes, then probably you need some kind of a folder system for how you want to store them. So basically what you're doing is when you finish a book, you're going to voice note and just have a conversation with your future self as if you were talking to a friend, and tell them everything, all the spoilers about the book. You can use the questions that I mentioned before, or you can just do a stream of consciousness of all your thoughts about the book, everything that bothered you, all the thoughts, all the things. Don't overthink it. Don't judge it. You're not censoring what you can say because nobody's going to see it. You're not posting this anywhere. These are just notes for your future self. Even if you end up talking for like 5 minutes, it will be so much faster to listen to yourself for 5 minutes before going into book 2 or the next sequel than having to read the whole book. Obviously, for the most part, these voice notes will live on your phone. But here's the other thing that Capacities can do. Capacities has also a WhatsApp integration, and you can actually send those voice notes from WhatsApp into your Capacities and save them there underneath the book object that you just saved. So if you want to keep everything in one place, so that way you can actually screenshot some quotes, keep some thoughts as you're reading, and then save those voice notes, then I would say Capacities is probably going to be your easiest way to do that. So to recap, pun intended, my best suggestion is that you drop all of your thoughts about a book, including the whole plot and everything that happens, into either your journal, whether that is paper or digital, or into a voice note. Personally, I think a voice note may be easier and more low maintenance as well. Also, if you're always using a consistent set of questions, you're gonna get into a routine and a habit of the things that you want to know about the book. So it'll come really easy and natural to just sit down and either record or write this down. And remember, you don't have the pressure of having to write a review, because that's not what you're doing. You're talking to yourself, your future self, and just spilling all the beans about what you just read. Now, personally, you guys know that I am a Notion fan, so I will always advocate for you having all of this information nicely, neatly categorized in Notion, because there are certain things and certain data points that you're not going to have with something like Capacities. But I personally also use Capacities for this because I find that it's really fun and really easy to use. I think the ease is what removes the friction, and it actually helps me to use the system. So I would definitely recommend that you give it a try. It is free, and also most of the features that I'm talking about that you are going to be using are going to be free features, so you don't need to pay for an upgrade. You don't have to be fancy with any of this. It just has to be functional, and it's basically going to create a breadcrumb trail for you to find all of the details of what you lost, because we can all relate to your memory slipping a little bit sometimes. And then when that next book drops, it's actually optional. It's going to be just for your enjoyment if you want to pick it back up and reread it, and not because you are so in the dark that if you don't read it, you're not going to know what it was about. Let me know in the comments if you guys use any of these tips, or if you have any other tips that you want to add as well for ways that you use in how you can remember more about what you read. I'm also going to leave links down below again for my beginner's guide to annotating books, so you can check that out on the blog, and to both of my Notion reading trackers as well if you're interested to check those out. I actually have a walkthrough that I did at the beginning of 2025 of what my reading tracker looks like in Notion. So if you want to dive deeper into that, I'm going to leave that video linked here so you can check it out. But in the meantime, that's all I have for you guys. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that bell notification so you don't miss any of our videos. And I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!